Thank you all for joining us today for this workshop on increasing sustainability in research. We're really grateful that you all took some time out of the day to come join us and to learn and exchange ideas. My name is Amanda and I'm the lead of the ORT. I'm really excited. We have three fantastic speakers today. We're going to share practical tips for how we can all do our part to green research. We're also really fortunate to have two volunteers that are going to help us, and we're really grateful for their participation, Liz and Leif as well. We hope that this session will be the start to many productive conversations about sustainability in all different aspects of your life and in all different research fields. We know that we're only going to be able to touch on some things. What we really hope that we can continue this conversation, one being on the UHN trainee Slack, and the other as part of the green team. So thank you to everybody who has already indicated in the registration that they wanted to be involved in those initiatives. We'll send out further information after this session. And for anybody else who would like to be involved and continue this conversation, please just feel free to reach out. So next, I want to start this session by acknowledging the land that we're on and the land that UHN operates. I acknowledge this land as a daughter and granddaughter of immigrants from Italy. I'm grateful for the opportunities this land has provided my family and all that the land provides for us every day. I acknowledge this land also as a member of the UHN Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee and the commitment I make every day to learn more and to invoke positive change. There's been a UHN hospital on this land since 1829. Long before that, Indigenous people were its stewards. They, as their descendants, and we at UHN do now, learned, shared knowledge, and healed each other. Ontario is covered by 46 territorial treaties and agreements with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Regardless of where we sit today, we owe much to the peoples that have called this land home. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work here. We remember and honor the legacy of the peoples who have been here before us and all who work to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real. I would like to invite you to join me in taking a moment to reflect on the land that you're on, especially since people might be joining us from different areas. This is especially important today and during Earth Month, as Indigenous cultures teach us a lot about sustainability and respecting the Earth. And we know that many Indigenous communities are the ones that are most impacted by climate change. Thank you. So before we get started and we kick off with our amazing speakers, I just wanted to tell you a couple of rules. So we would ask to please remain muted with your video off during the presentation. We are recording this session and we'll share the recording with everybody after. If you have questions for the speakers, please share them in the chat, and we'll be able to share those with the speakers. And this is a safe space, so we want to acknowledge everybody's lived experiences, so please be respectful and just help to make this a wonderful discussion. So we are so fortunate, like I said before, to have such amazing speakers. So first we'll start off with a presentation by Warren from the UHN Green Team. We'll then carry off with a presentation by Ronald Chung about his experience in the radiation medicine program. We will then have a little bit about green AI by our postdoc, Dr. Leif Simmatis. And then at the end, we'll have some time for us to share resources and discuss together. Now, a big aspect of this workshop is we really wanted to make it interactive, and we really wanted to hear what you're learning from the presentations, the take-homes that you're going to take back to your research and your life, and any resources or tips or ways that you have promoted sustainability in your research labs or in your lives. And to do that, we will be using Poll Everywhere. So we'll start the first poll on this next slide, but I wanted to share with you here, there's a link for how you can connect to the polls, or you can use the QR code that is on this slide right here. So if you can take a second and check that out, I think Liz is also going to put it in the chat. And with that, we will start the first poll. Perfect. So the first question here is, what do you think is the most wasteful or energy consuming part of your research? So this is making a word cloud here. So you can see that lots of people are saying commuting is the biggest part of waste in their research. And that's something that is definitely true and something we're going to talk about in some of the presentations. Any other parts? I know when I was a PhD student, I was always concerned about the amount of plastic waste that we were making when it came to disposable pipette tips, as well as serological pipettes. I always felt really like that was creating a huge amount of waste. So whether people are saying disposable and plastics, which is great. Great, and these are wonderful things to keep in mind. We can continue to reflect on these as we move through the presentations. Awesome. Lots of plastic and lots of commuting for sure. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will pass it on to Leif.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming out to listen to all these amazing presentations that we're going to be hearing from. First of which, I'd like to introduce Warren Marasigan. Apologies if I got that wrong. Warren is Sustainability Coordinator at UHN. He's in charge of all things green at UHN research sites and oversees the green team. Warren is completing his Bachelor of Environmental Studies at the University of Waterloo with a focus on geography and environmental management. He also has a Bachelor of Arts from Ryerson University in Environmental and Urban Sustainability. Thank you, Warren, for making the time to join us today. Warren is accompanied today by Lisa Van Lint, the Manager of Environmental Sustainability at UHN. Welcome as well, Lisa, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leif. I'll just start by sharing my screen to get the presentation out for today. But I'll start by saying good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for letting me take the time to talk about sustainability within UHN research. Today, I'll just be providing a brief information session on tackling our waste to landfill from research, the current green initiatives going on at our UHN research sites, as well as green programs that you can take advantage of or be a part of. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Warren, and as Leif mentioned, I am the Sustainability Coordinator student in the Energy and Environment Department. And I mainly handle the sustainable initiatives and operations throughout the research sites. So to begin, why do we want to green research? Why is it important to take the necessary steps towards climate action and sustainability? And to give you the short answer, the main reason is the current climate crisis. As healthcare professionals, it is important for us to take the lead on climate action as we are looked upon as trusted advisors. Inadvertently, healthcare contributes a certain portion of GHG emissions. And when we look at the waste we create, our current factors have us on a linear waste cycle where products are mainly single use and disposed of in the landfill. So how does sustainability fit into all of this? Well, to begin, sustainability has various meanings, but ideally we want to think of sustainability in a way where we want to meet the needs of the present without jeopardizing the needs of the future. When we analyze the UHN as a whole, we want to mitigate those factors that contribute to pollution and resource depletion as much as possible and create green incentives / alternatives that staff can utilize. It's definitely important to begin the conversation and create awareness on what climate actions need to be done. But it is another thing to take that information and create behavioral changes from it. And so something that we can always do to begin incorporating the ideas of sustainability in our everyday lives is always remembering our basic 3 R's of reducing, reusing, and recycling for energy and materials. And on that note, as you may be familiar with some of the R's, I do want to touch upon the 5 main R's that we at UHN hold so dearly. First off, refuse is at the top. let us simply refuse to accept things that you don't need, as we want to aim to stop waste before it starts. And this could also be refusing vendors that don't provide take-back incentives. Next, we also want to reduce. We want to aim to create less waste when we can, whether it be in the office, labs, or at home. If it isn't necessary to use certain products, then it makes all the difference when it comes to diverting waste from the landfill. We also want to aim to reuse. So simply reusing supplies instead of taking more. And some examples are the swap shelf and PMCRT, as well as donating supplies to our Operation Green program, which I'll dive into momentarily. But also reusing can be as simple as bringing reusable cups to work or having them available within your workspace. Then we have recycling, everyone's favorite, where materials can get a second chance at life instead of the landfill. But let us try to put an emphasis on the first 2 Rs before considering recycling. And lastly, we have rot. And here we just want to aim to increase composting our leftovers here at the UHN. But overall, we want to branch away from the idea of a linear waste system and move towards a circular economy. And so one way to start that change towards stopping waste is to take advantage of items that can be reused by other labs, as it helps reduce the amount of waste generated and saves labs money from purchasing more supplies. And so what better way to put an emphasis on reusing than to take advantage of the PMCRT swap shelf. This hidden gem is located on the 5th floor of the PMCRT building. And if you pick something up, you don't have to leave anything. You can pick up, drop off, or do both. But please don't leave any garbage / used materials on the shelf, and please don't leave any expired materials. If you want to take that extra step for your lab, you can start a swap shelf within your own research site, or you can go through our materials exchange program to help move items. And here at the materials exchange program, our friends at Partners in Project Green are willing to connect you with people who are looking to take supplies. And an example can be any excess office furniture that you are throwing out. Now, what energy initiatives are being done at research sites? One big incentive is the Shut the Sash / Store program. Some of you might recognize me as the person who runs around the labs, stamping the sash cards for the past couple of months. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for your continued participation in the Shut the Sash program. When open, fume hoods use about 3.5 times more energy than the average household and exhaust an average of 515 cubic feet per minute of air. But when shut, fume hoods use approximately 4.5 times less air. So again, please try and keep those fume hoods closed when you have a chance. As you can see on the slide, research currently holds an average compliance rate of 99% in March, so keep it up. Labs that achieve 100% can have a chance for winning a pizza party, which right now is mainly meal vouchers for each of your lab members due to COVID measures. But in order to win these vouchers, we look not just at your fume hood compliance, but your waste audits, your ice pack recycling, and Research Green Team contribution. Another big initiative is the ice pack recycling program. Here, labs can take a part of our recycling initiative that we have set up with certain vendors to take back our ice packs in order to divert them from the landfill. In April, we were able to send out nearly 400 kilograms of ice packs, and throughout the 4th quarter of 2021, we sent out nearly a total of 881 kilograms. Ideally, we want to bring in more labs to take part of our recycling program, and we want to avoid putting ice packs into recycling that are known for leaking and causing contamination, such as Nordic ice packs or Uline ice packs. But right now, we have ice pack collection buckets laid out throughout our research sites. And if your lab is interested in joining, you can contact our energy and environment team so that we can set you up within our collection process. Another initiative that we have going on is the introduction of our new fun size print for freezer efficiency practices. Some of you may have already seen these displayed throughout the freezers, but here they provide the best practices to maintain freezers to keep energy consumption low, because UHN freezers produce a lot of energy, nearly the total energy of 85 households per year to be exact. And here they provide the flyers provide 6 common practices that your lab can use to limit energy consumption. If your lab is interested in getting some of these posters for your freezers, feel free to reach out to me after the meeting so we can get them to you. But moving forward, I want to talk about why it is important that we sort our waste properly. I know that it can be a little bit time consuming to think about where each material goes, but I promise it is worth it. First, when you properly sort, you get a better financial return. And this applies both at home and at the UHN. The more items that you divert from the landfill, the more recycling you have, which gives us a higher return on rebates. Secondly, contamination occurs if we do not sort. And so what is contamination? If materials are sorted into the wrong bin, such as placing a water bottle in the paper stream or a coffee cup in the recycling bin, then contamination occurs and the whole bag goes to the landfill, even if there are recyclable materials in that bin. So as we take a look at UHN or the research site's Q1 quarterly visual waste audit compliance rates, you can see that garbage is the area of most concern, as about 40% of the items found in the garbage can either be recycled or composted. But moving forward, we want to bring that compliance rate up to increase our diversion numbers. And so you might recognize these images as it is the waste signs that are displayed throughout our sites in the office and in the lunch spaces. And I'm showing you this to highlight some common misconceptions, as unfortunately, there are no universal rules for recycling. The rules here at the UHN are slightly different than your municipality rules, and each municipality differs from one another as well. It's really all depending on the city's waste technology. So the aim for these signs is to highlight common items found in recycling and the compost that should be disposed of in the garbage, and then highlight common items found in the garbage that can be diverted to other streams to avoid contamination. For example, a common misconception due to different rules is that at the UHN, styrofoam is considered garbage, whereas the City of Toronto will recycle it. So if you are from Toronto and you want to take that extra sustainable step, you can bring your styrofoam home to recycle it if you can. For those outside of Toronto, just please check your local municipality rules to really make sure. But as well, different UHN sites have different rules. Here at Toronto Western Hospital, Kremble Discovery Tower, Princess Margaret Hospital, and Toronto Rehab Institute, they combine the two recycling streams to have mixed recycling. Whereas at PMCRT, Princess Margaret Cancer Research Tower, and Toronto General Hospital, they separate recycling into paper and containers recycling. And so I want to touch on some items that can be confused for the wrong waste stream. First, any containers covered in food or oils must be rinsed before being recycled. For example, yogurt containers must be rinsed, the foil lid put in the garbage, and the container in recycling. Otherwise, the entire bin can be considered contaminated and cannot be recycled. As for paper plates covered in food, as much as we want to recycle it because it is paper, it can also go in the compost. For bottles that are filled with liquids, they must be drained prior to being recycled. Straws can easily be mistaken for recycling as they are made from plastic, but they are considered garbage at the UHN. And finally, we have chip bags or candy bar wrappers, which are garbage. For these, I go by the rule that if you can scrunch them in your hand and they make a crinkly noise, then they are garbage. And so over the past few months during my visual waste audits, I found 3 common mistakes in research sites that I want to highlight with you. What I'll do now is I'll show you an item, and I'll give you all a couple of seconds to tell me where you think it should be disposed of. So you can either type this in the chat or turn your mics on. But for the first one, we have soft plastics, which include grocery bags, bread bags, Ziploc bags. Where do you think these soft items or soft plastics go? Okay, seeing a couple of recycling and garbage answers. For those of you that said garbage, you are correct. Soft plastics are garbage at the UHN, but make sure to check your rules within your municipality, as the City of Toronto will still collect them as a recyclable material. The next one, we have the coffee cup, including the lid and cardboard sleeve. Where do we think these 3 items should individually go? The coffee cup, lid, and cardboard sleeve. Okay, seeing a couple of answers of sleeve and lid in recycling and cup in the garbage. Okay, so the lid goes in the containers recycling. Unless it is black, then it goes into the garbage, as black plastic can't be recycled at the UHN. And I think, James, I think you mentioned that, so good on you for knowing that one. The sleeve then goes into paper recycling. and the cup goes into the garbage. And the cup is usually the trickiest part as it is made from paper, so it can be easily be mistaken for recycling. But to keep the contents inside the cup warm, plastic lines the inside, making it not recyclable. So it is important to take these extra 3 seconds to separate the 3 pieces to ensure no contamination of the bins occurs. And so we can divert waste from the landfill together. Essentially, the more that we're diverting it together, the more that we're saving together. And so moving on for the final one, we have paper towels, napkins, and tissues. Where do we think these items go? So paper towels, napkins, and tissues. So these go in the compost. These products are too low quality to enter recycling, and even the bacteria or food on them will break down during the composting process. However, if there is no compost bin available, then you can place them in the garbage. Yes, Doug, this is a thing that always ends up in the garbage. Ideally, though, I've noticed that especially in the research sites, there are always compost bins available. So please aim to keep these in the compost in order to at least increase our diversion numbers. But moving on, I want to quickly touch on hazardous waste. So hazardous waste costs about 6 times the amount of garbage, the amount that garbage does to dispose of, and at the same time has a greater environmental impact as the waste needs to be autoclaved or incinerated. So less is always better. Only dispose of materials in hazardous bins that must go into the bin. But outside of that, here are some initiatives that you can take a part of if you are looking to get more involved in all things green outside of research. Operation Green is a special program to collect unused medical supplies and donate them to communities in need around the world. With the support of dedicated UHN staff in the Energy and Environment team, transportation, and UHN and volunteer resources, we have saved thousands of pounds of medical supplies from the landfill and helped strained medical systems worldwide. This reduces the environmental impact of the healthcare field while increasing our global social responsibility. By diverting materials from the landfill, this program also provides financial savings better used on patient care. Since 2011, Operation Green has worked with humanitarian organizations such as Not Just Tourists to achieve its goal. Most recently, our Operation Green program was dedicated to helping send humanitarian aid to hospitals in Ukraine. With the help of Not Just Tourists and the Canadian Ukrainian Foundation, we sent nearly 1,400 kilograms of supplies in March. Ultimately, healthcare can produce a lot of excess supplies, and a lot of them tend to end up in the landfill. But by taking advantage of reuse programs like Operation Green, we allow communities that don't have the same access to supplies as us a chance. So if you are interested in joining and becoming a donor, you can email operationgreen@uhn.ca to join the email list. Also, other ways to actively get involved in sustainability is to take advantage of the various transportation support services that UHN offers. Toronto General Hospital is now home to 126 new secure indoor bike parking spots in the southeast corner of Gerrard Street and University Avenue. The entrance is conveniently and safely located by the crosswalk. All you have to do is just swipe your UHN ID to access the space. So no messing around with the keys, no fees, just clean and safe commuting. But also PMCRT and KDT have indoor biking rooms as well. Also feel free to use our EV, electric vehicle charging stations located throughout multiple sites at the UHN. All of them are free to charge as well. Ultimately, changing transportation away from gas burning single occupancy vehicles is one of the biggest ways people can personally help prevent climate change. If you are an avid biker, you can also be sure to join our bicycle user group by contacting the email on the slide here. And so that really reaches the end of what I wanted to discuss today. I just wanted to take the opportunity to invite you to join the Research Green team if you haven't already. Being a part of the team keeps you updated with the Shut the Sash program, ice pack recycling, and UHN-wide initiatives such as Bike Month, Earth Month, and much more. So if you are interested, don't hesitate to send me an email. Other ways to stay informed are to check out our Energy and Environment departmental intranet page, or you can check out our blog at talkingtrashwithuhn.ca. And here on our blog, you can keep up with all of the current projects that is going on at UHN that the Energy and Environment team are pushing out. You can also follow the blog on the Twitter and Facebook at green@uhn.ca. As well, if you have any green related questions about this session, feel free to email me anytime at green@uhn.ca. But for those of you that don't know, the UHN's green initiatives have globally been recognized recently as we received gold from the International Hospital Federation in Spain for being 2021's greenest hospital out of all the hospitals in the world. So a big shout out goes to you all for taking a part in some of the various green initiatives that have been put forth. If it weren't for all of you, then we wouldn't be able to really showcase our efforts towards a sustainable healthcare framework. Again, these are just an example of the changes that you can take upon your labs, offices, as well as your personal changes in your everyday lives. The UHN is constantly evolving, and the introduction and implementation of bigger projects, such as our Noventa wet system that uses thermal energy to save 250,000 tons of carbon emissions per year, is just an example of the many sustainable projects that we are pushing forward. However, awarenesses of the various initiatives towards Shut the Sash and Operation Green can allow you to feel more involved and contributing towards UHN's vision of a healthier world. I want to thank you all again for letting me speak, and I hope this was informative and helpful. I'll now pass this back to Leif and Amanda. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, I guess I'll open the floor to you.
Great. So we'll open it up. If anybody has questions for Warren, you can please put them in the chat. And in the meantime, Liz is going to do another poll.
So you can complete the poll for the following question. Which of Warren's green research tips will you incorporate into your research or your lab? So you can complete the poll using the link I just put in the chat. Also, if you have any question for Warren, I invite you to put them in the chat as well.
Ice pack recycling is definitely one that we want to increase. Same with the swap shelf. I do want to mention that we are wanting to introduce pipette tip recycling, and it's something that we hope to bring into the labs this year. And outside of just, Kremble and PMCRT, even touch upon Princess Margaret, Toronto General, all the labs essentially.
So we have indeed the ice pack recycling, everything that's waste separation, the different bins that we can use, they disappeared, but we also had the swap shelf, which is a really good idea, which can also be applied. I'm from University of Laval, and what we did was a swap shelf for books, actually. So it can be used for research material, but also for books that are commonly used in the labs. So we have a question in the chat about the good and bad ice packs. So which one can be recycled or not?
Yeah, sorry
Warren?
about that. Yeah, sorry,
Yes.
I had myself on mute there. There's a couple, there's a bunch actually that we don't take back. And it's kind of hard to differentiate. I know we have kind of signs above our ice pack recycling. Mainly what we see that we is the Nordic ice and the U-line ice packs, as those are commonly leaking and breaking. We do not take those back. We do take back, I believe they're like Fridger brick, if I'm not mistaken. We also take back polar ice ones. There's a lot on there, so I can look up the list and maybe include that in the slide and maybe forward it to you guys. Because if I were to go through the list, it might take some time to touch upon each one. But yeah, just look for the signs. There are signs that labs that currently have the ice pack recycling initiative going. There are signs of which we take back and which to put it in the garbage. Hopefully in the future, we aim to eliminate the purchasing of those that commonly leak, and that way we don't have to throw them out into the garbage.
Exactly, the refuse that we're trying to incorporate, exactly. We have one last question before we go to the next speaker. What would the process of pipette tip recycling entail in order to prevent cross-contamination?
Lisa, I'm not sure if you would have more information on that. By chance?
Sorry, regarding the cross-contamination and the recycling program, it's not so much a recycling program that we're looking at as a reuse. And the way that this would go is using our current autoclaving systems that we have for sterilization. So anything that would be coming from this would be a system that goes through the sterilization programs. So what we're trying to do, and actually this is really, I'm really glad that Warren brought this up, because we are looking at, if possible, we're trying to see what the appetite is in labs to be able to use this sort of thing and get the system running, because there's a real logistics and people side to this to make sure that we can actually support this. But if there's the appetite for it, and if labs really want it, it's the kind of thing that can happen. So let us know afterwards.
Thank you. So I will we'll move on to Leif to present our next speaker.
Right. So our next speaker, let me get here, will be Ronald Chung. Ronald is currently a master's candidate in epidemiology and biostatistics at Western University. In September, he'll be entering law school at University of Ottawa. He did both his undergrad and master's degree at Western in epidemiology, and his research primarily focuses on ophthalmology, artificial intelligence, epidemia, and knowledge synthesis, Over the summer of 2021, he worked under the supervision of Dr. Philip Wong at the radiation medicine program at Princess Margaret Hospital, where he spearheaded the STEER COVID-19 project. In past summers, he's also worked on microcosting and quality-based procedure projects at PMH. Lost it there. And Ronald is currently accompanied by Dr. Philip Wong, clinician scientist at Princess Margaret and staff radiation oncologist in the radiation medicine program. Welcome to you both. And Ronald, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, everyone. And again, my name is Ronald, and thank you for having me today at today's seminar. And so my project today that I'll be sharing with you is titled The Short-Term Environmental and Clinical Effects of the Radiation Medicine Program's Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic. And so this was a project that I worked on last summer, again, with Dr. Phil Wong and Dr. Emma Ito at PMH. And I'm really excited to share with you kind of, even some of the topics that Warren talked about were things that we considered in the study that we did last summer. And so what really brought us to this project was, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were thinking about, what are some current environmental practices that we're doing in the department? And evidently, with so many new changes made in the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic in our hospital, in our institution, in our department, we wanted to see if there were any environmental practices that we can continue to promote and continue to further as we come out of the pandemic. And so we were really interested in that environmental aspect in our department. And before I kind of jump into our study and this presentation, I just wanted to give a very brief overview of the patient flow when they come in for radiation treatment at PMH. And so after a patient gets a consult, they would then come into the hospital for a CT scan where we would get their images. And after getting all the scans done, our dosimetrists and our physicists will work with the oncologist to pump out a treatment plan for them. And typically, their radiation treatment can be from one treatment all the way to even 40 treatments, so 40-day kind of radiation therapy treatments for the course of their procedure. And so evidently when COVID-19 first hit that, that first and second year of 2020, there was a shift in the way that we conducted patient care, evidently. There was a change from staff to working at home remotely. There was a shift to virtual and phone consults and care and follow-ups. And there's also something that we did in our department specifically is to prescribe an alternate dose fractionation regimen. And this is also known as hypofractionation. And so, as I kind of mentioned in the past slide, a person's treatment when they come in can really range from 1 to 40 treatments. So 1 to 40 days that have to come back and forth into the hospital 40 times, maybe 25 times perhaps. And so our department really wanted to reduce the foot traffic in the hospital, thereby reducing that COVID-19 transmission during that kind of critical time. And so let's say your typical radiation treatment was 25 days. After, perhaps during this COVID-19 year, your 25-day therapy treatment might then be condensed to only 15 treatments. And then each treatment has a more intense and higher dose of radiation. And so that makes you come to hospital less, but then you'll be subjected to a more intense treatment per visit. And so our research question really was to really assess what's the environmental and clinical impact as a result of these changes in response to these strategic changes that our department made. And we wanted to first assess the carbon emissions, identify some of the key sources of CO2 emissions from our department. And also we wanted to look at the patient's clinical impact, whether or not there were any short-term related radiation-related toxicities and adverse events that they had because of these intensified treatments that they were subjected to. And firstly, for the purposes of this presentation, we'll just go through some of these three main sources of CO2 that we looked at. And first and foremost, it was the patient travel. As we kind of looked in the poll that we did earlier in the seminar, commuting and patient traveling, that's a big contribution to CO2 emissions. And we were able to compare our cohort from 2019 to 2020 year. That was our pre-pandemic year. That was what we assumed as our typical year at PMH. And we compared that cohort with our patients from the 2020 to 2021 year to compare that first pandemic year. And we were able to access people's postal code and see what was the travel distances that they made from home to Princess Margaret, from them traveling back and forth for their treatments. And we were able to look at their CO2 emissions from that perspective. And then we also looked at the Linac power usage. And so Linac it stands for a linear accelerator. And so this is the machine that pumps out, that gives the radiation to the patient. And so it's really special in radiation oncology that, this machine, this Linac, is really the main driving kind of energy consumption in a patient's radiation therapy pathway. And so we were able to pinpoint the exact time and date when these machines, these Linacs, were turned on for a patient's treatment. And we were able to get that energy consumption and electricity and output from every single treatment and every single dose that the patient had every day. And finally, we also kind of assessed the PPEs, those single-use disposable PPEs that we all have, maybe probably still use today. And we wanted to also see, how much increase there was in that first year. And secondary, we also looked at the patient's adverse events and their toxicities, and to see how many visits did they go to the ER as a result of perhaps those intensified treatments, and the RNC, which is the radiation nursing clinic, which is a drop-in nursing clinic that the patients can go to during the course of their radiation treatment and even within 4 weeks of their treatment as well. And so in total, we had around 10,000 patients that we looked at with 14,000 treatments in our 2 fiscal year cohorts. And we can see that in both hyperfractionation treatments, that in general, there was more hyperfractionated, so that more intense treatment subjected across the body in all cancer types during the COVID year. And in the curative setting, we see that there was a 10% increase in the use of hypofractionation. So in general, there was an increased use of that intensified treatment that many of the oncologists prescribe to their patients. And so looking at the environmental impact and looking at that summary together, we kind of estimated the patient travel. And as I kind of mentioned before, in that first year of COVID, we really reduced in a lot of patient travel, around 750,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions. And so a third of that came from the hyperfractionation. So it came from the reduction in the amount of days that the patients had to come in for the treatment. And almost 2/3 of that came from our virtual care. It came from our virtual consults and follow-up, when traditionally the patient would be coming into the hospital, that was then done virtually or on the phone instead. And for our Linac, for the machine that we actually used, there wasn't a big substantial decrease in the electric consumption of comparing between the pre-pandemic year and the pandemic year. And of course, there was an increase in the amount of PPE that we used. And this number is probably a very big underestimate because we tried to look in the literature and the CO2 emissions of all sorts of PPE, and we couldn't find everything. So this is a pretty big underestimation. And there are so many things that we can consider with PPE, even looking at, how are we disposing these things? Are we incinerating the PPEs in our institution? Are we just throwing them into the garbage? What's the process of that? And what pathways do these garbage lead into, or things that we can consider as well as we move forward? And in total, as a rough estimate, we saved around 743,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions in that pandemic year compared to the pre-pandemic year. And if this is a really hard number for you to imagine, this is approximately the amount of CO2 sequestered from 12,000 trees for 10 years. And it's around 182 Canadian household annual energy consumption. So from our department alone, this was how much we saved, majority from the reduction in patient travel. And this shows us that there is a potential that we can continue this as we kind of move forward. But looking at the clinical impact, when it comes to a patient's health, when it comes to toxicities and radiation-related adverse events, it doesn't matter how big of an environmental impact we're making if it affects the patient health. And that is still our first main concern in the healthcare setting. But fortunately, we saw that in the hyperfractionation cohort here, that there was, for the radiation nursing clinic, there was a significant reduction in patients coming into the RNC to those that were subjected to hypofractionation. And that tells us that there were less people who needed to, who potentially had a serious adverse event that needed to come in. However, we did see an increase in the patients who were subjected to the traditional conventional way of therapy. And we saw that there were an increase in people coming into the RNC for this setting. But we do hypothesize that there was some bias in this estimate, because perhaps some oncologists thought that patients who came into their treatment who are more frail and fragile were kept in the conventional form of radiation therapy rather than subjecting them to a more intense regimen to prevent them to continue fragilizing them. And so perhaps because these people were kept in the conventional therapy, that we saw more people going to the RNC for this reason. And so finally, kind of to wrap this up, there are many things that we can do, that our department can do, that Princess Margaret can do, that UHN can do. And there are many things that we can continue to evaluate and explore and innovate as we move forward. And as you saw, the majority of our CO2 emissions came from the patient travel. So how can we find ways to incentivize people to maybe perhaps take the public transit and feel safe about taking the public transit to their appointments? And we see that Princess Margaret captures a large geographical area in Ontario. Many people travel long distances out of the GTA area to come to Princess Margaret. So how can our large tertiary kind of institution help support local communities and local hospitals to also provide other high quality forms of care in the radiation treatment as well? And these are things that we can think about to promote an environmental conscious mindset in radiation oncology. And so from this study, we've learned that there is a huge potential to continue that hypofractionated treatment for patients. We see that in the short term, that perhaps there are less adverse events, and it suggests that it can be safe. And we can do much more to assess the long-term effects and long-term toxicities as well. But we can continue to look at virtual care to continue to provide high quality and safe virtual care moving forward. And also as an institution and a department to have an eco-conscious mindset as we plan forward towards 2030 with the Paris Agreement and 2050 with our net zero greenhouse gas emission goal in Canada. So that wraps up my presentation, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for the presentation. So next question for the poll will be, what did you learn from Ronald's presentation that you will adopt in your research or your life? So once again, I will put the link in the chat if you need. Yes, virtual care is good for the planet, exactly. This is a very good point. This is also the point that I had for that, in that same vein, travel impacts. We have unsubscribing from junk email lists. I think it's a good idea for everyone. We don't always realize that the impact of all the emails that we send and receive. I am myself guilty of having junk emails. And in addition of being annoying, it's not good for the planet. So let's get rid of it. So we have travel again. Making people feel safe on TTC. This is also a good point, especially in time of pandemic. Yes, in terms of clinical treatment, we can adopt eco-friendly treatment regimens without adverse clinical impacts, especially for either the patients that are coming from a long distance. As a tertiary center, we have patients traveling for 2 hours to come to the clinic, so it can be a good idea to test or use different treatment regimens to see if we can alter them a little bit. So we did not have any direct question in the chat, so we would be ready to go with Leif's presentation. So Leif is a postdoctoral fellow at UHN and at University of Toronto. He said himself is not an expert in environment or environmental studies, but he is. He has a great knowledge in AI and computing mechanism that can drain a lot of energy. So we're very happy to have your input on that, Leif. You can go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Leif. I'm a postdoc. And yes, my name is Leif. And yes, I'm talking about environmental issues. So the pun is free. You can have that one. So yeah, I'll talk very briefly about this because, as Liz said, I'm by no means an expert in healthcare AI, but I am very interested in applications of AI to healthcare specifically, and the environmental part comes out of that secondarily. So we know that AI has been adopted in a variety of sectors, and healthcare is no exception. You can see over here on the right that just the raw investment in terms of US dollars has gone up by about tenfold between 2014 and 2021. So we know that AI has this burgeoning application list that's only accelerating, as even now, driven mostly by its integration into wearable devices, the Internet of Things economy. Now we have the metaverse, another great invention. And a bunch of other things, augmented reality, robotics, all of these things will be powered by AI if they aren't already. But of course, this widespread adoption of AI has really, shone a spotlight on its potential environmental impact. And so there's been work done over the last couple of years to really quantify this, really put hard numbers to the emissions that can be caused by AI, as well as just the costs in terms of money. And you can see even for this table here is a summary that was done in 2019 of models that are used for processing natural language. And even fairly small models like the ones in the top row here that an individual could feasibly train using a simple cloud computing free subscription, they can emit between 20 and 200 pounds of CO2 equivalents per training session. And for larger ones that are used at production scale, and which are in some cases currently deployed now, training them, which admittedly you only have to do once, but still can emit up to 300 tons of CO2. And so this really means that we have to focus on ways to, as practitioners and as researchers, mitigate the potential environmental impacts of a widespread AI adoption, while still, getting the benefits of good performing AI-powered systems. And so there's been a lot of work done on this over the last couple of years. I've highlighted one paper in particular here that I really enjoyed reading. If you're in any way interested, please do seek this one out, and I'm happy to provide the link if you can't find it. And there's a number of recommendations that have been made throughout the literature, but I'll cover a couple here that I think are most salient. The first is smart algorithm or model choice. So you can see here on the right a summary of energy usage to run a single image through a variety of image classification models. And this is from a very well-known image detection benchmark. And you can see the energy on the y-axis, the year on the x-axis, and it's color-coded by accuracy of that model. So way over here on the left, we have one of the oldest deep learning models that would have been used in this challenge. And it was not very accurate, like 55%, and took about 0.1 joules of energy to run one sample. And if we move forward here, we can see that, at the upper limits, there's cases where it takes, 300 times more energy to process a sample, even though it's more accurate. Whereas, in some cases, you don't have to expend any more energy at all, and in some cases less, to get better performance. And so really, AI practitioners and people developing AI-powered systems should focus on models more like these rather than like these. I'm assuming you can see my mouse. Maybe not. But aim for the bottom right, not the top right. And while we're talking about energy, another thing that a lot of researchers seem to forget is that in terms of energy generation per CO2 equivalent, it's not created equal. We're quite fortunate in Eastern Canada to have ready access to very green energy. So we emit very low amounts of CO2 per kilowatt hour. But in places like the Midwestern United States, for example, or in Northern Europe, where there's a lot of data centers, where a lot of AI-powered systems are hosted, it's not so good. It can vary by, 20 to 50 times. So really, people who are designing AI-powered systems need to focus on smart choice of hosting location, as well as other factors. And so I'll wrap up here because I don't have a lot of time. There's a couple key messages to take home for practitioners who implement AI-powered systems and for researchers who develop them. For those who are implementing systems like these, it's most important to be mindful. So to choose your models carefully, choose them fit for purpose. So don't go for the most complicated, most powerful model you can possibly use when you're just, trying to tell cats from dogs. And for researchers, be transparent. Provide the information that's necessary for downstream users to make intelligent choices. That dialogue is necessary to keep the potential environmental impacts of AI in check. And I'll wrap that up here. I have some links here, which you can't use because this is a slideshow, but you can look these up, or I can provide the links to you if you want, and you can get in touch with me at one of these sources down here. So that's it from me, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Leif. It's really informative. So in line with the tips and information that Leif shared with us today, please share any sustainability tips or resources you find useful using the Poll Everywhere link that I will put in the chat again. If you have any question for Leif as well, you can type them in the chat.
While we're waiting for people to add in their sustainability tips, I just want to say thank you to all of our amazing speakers who've joined us today and to both of our volunteers who have helped us. We are so grateful to have you all here and to share these resources. We will share the video, we'll share the slides, we'll share all of the emails and the resources that were presented today in an email that will hopefully go up today, if not Monday, with the follow-up to this workshop. So thank you very much. And if there are any other discussions or questions people have, feel free to drop them in the chat and we're happy to discuss further. But thank you all for attending.
Yeah, I think we have a few questions. The first one I saw was asking about whether servers should be placed in locations or countries where there's the greenest energy grid. And I think absolutely. I think that's probably one of the easiest things that can be done, because I mean, we think about data centers as these great monolithic things, but I mean, they're really just computers. Like, you do have to set up network equipment to get them to talk to the wider computing infrastructure in a region, but aside from that, the hardware can be moved, right? And just anecdotally, there are huge differences between some of the main cloud providers. I'm not going to call out a single company or another by name, but the numbers exist. And let's just say that one particular major cloud provider uses about 3 times as much green energy as another. And the one that uses less is mostly coal, and the one that uses more is mostly solar. So I will leave that to the audience to dig those numbers up themselves. But yes, there are massive differences to keep in mind. What else do we have here? There's only 2 more quick questions. Do we have time for the 2? Amanda, do you think that's feasible? Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
we have time to answer them. Sorry, I was
Okay.
trying to find the right button.
Yeah, all good. The next question I see here is, what's the first step to do to get involved in AI research? Play around. You know, there's open source data sets. Kaggle has a lot of fun competitions. You can learn about the basics, and it can help you kind of get a feel for it, and you can pursue it more formally later if you want. I know Coursera also has a lot of very interesting kind of introductory courses. And yeah, that can get you started, and then you can just go from there. There's lots of open source materials as well, and I'm happy to connect you with any of those if you want. Just send me an email or message me or whatever. I'll be happy to talk. And last question is, do you have any recommendations for deep learning researchers to reduce carbon emissions, considering how much computational resources it consumes? So that's a good question. And I kind of touched on a couple of things, but there are so many. Like, number one thing, if you're designing like a research program or a research project, the number one question is asking whether you need deep learning at all, or do you need like a specific deep learning model? You know, prioritize smaller models that, you know, might have fewer parameters to update. That's usually a good heuristic for how much energy they're going to take. And yeah, pick, you know, data sources, data servers, or data centers and servers, those are the words, that use more green energy, and try to pick them as close to your home region as possible, just to reduce any kind of emissions resulting from, you know, energy transmission or data transmission over long distances. Yeah, I hope that answers people's questions. I don't want to take all day.
Well, thank you so much again to all of our speakers for joining us and for this wonderful discussion. And we hope to continue these conversations to all make and do our part to reduce the impact that we have on the environment. So thank you so much, and we'll be sending you resources soon.